Welcome back. Happy Monday. And the question for us today is, what does it feel like to rely on God or to trust in God? Because it feels very different for all of us, and we all approach that question from a different history and a different perspective. And that's where we're going to go this week, because that's where I was led this past weekend. Let me share a little bit with you about my weekend, and then we'll kind of dive into that question together. This past weekend, it was an awesome opportunity just for me to look at my experience of life the last 6 weeks, like so many of us have been doing. And as I acknowledged many of the blessings that have been a really profound gift in my life of late, I also had to acknowledge in conversation with God this weekend just how much I've had to trust in Him, depend on Him, rely on Him, not only more frequently in the last 6 weeks, but more personally in the last 6 weeks. Trust for me is, it's not a very easy thing. It taps into vulnerability and it taps into my fear. It requires that I let go of control. And I think I was in a space this past weekend where I had to name all of that. And as I was just kind of asking God for help in conversation with God about trusting in Him, I was actually led to the Acts of the Apostles, which is what I was not expecting. But it's been the first reading at all the Masses since Easter. And I know that for many of us, Easter feels different than what it has felt like in the past. But I was led to not only the first reading at the Sunday Masses, but all the daily Masses too, or Acts of the Apostles. And I was just kind of fascinated with what I found there. Ordinary guys, ordinary women who without Jesus in their midst, facing all the unknown, facing persecution that was coming their way, trying to figure out how to live in the circumstances that they were in. They had to rely on God. They had to trust in God. And some amazing things happened, but it didn't come without their offering God space in their heart. And I was just kind of fascinated with what I was reading and what I was learning. And I think all of us can learn a lot right now as we just pay attention to the readings at Mass and as we pay attention to Acts of the Apostles. But dependence on God, reliance on God, trust in God, what's that like for you? For me, it, again, as I said, it taps into vulnerability. When I have to trust in God, just like when I have to trust in other people, I have to stand, it feels like, inside of me before an option. Either they can come through or maybe they won't. And standing in that place in my heart where I don't know what the outcome's going to be, it engenders vulnerability. I don't know if you know what that feels like. Trusting God, it means I'm not trusting in myself. And I struggle with the sin of pride and the struggle of trying to control my life and self-sufficiency, just like all of us do. But when you and I are called to trust in God, it certainly taps into the fact that we're trusting in another person that's not us, right? I'm so conditioned to trying to control my life in the small details or even in the big things that when I'm trusting in another, it opens up like vulnerability and fear. And when we depend on God, when we trust in God, even with all of the clarity that we might have in discernment, none of us know exactly what's in the mind of God, and none of us know exactly how things are going to pan out in the end, do we? So for me, what's it like for me when I have to depend on God, when I have to trust in Him alone? It's difficult. I go in and out. I want to do it sometimes, and then I back out, and I try to take control all over again. There's a great line from someone who was on retreat, and they said it was a priest that I was directing, and he said, on the day of his ordination, he gave his life to God, and he's been fighting with God ever since, trying to take it back. And I've done that, right? On the day that I was ordained a priest, I gave my life to God, and I've been fighting with God ever since, trying to take it back. I don't know if you've ever done that. where you give God the ability to act in your life, and then as soon as you do that, you're afraid you did it, and you try to take those words back, right? But trusting in God, relying on God, it can feel lots of different things. The emotions of vulnerability, the emotions of fear, the emotion of unprotected. I think that I came face to face with that this weekend. I was able to name the fact that when I am relinquishing control of something, it's almost like the control sometimes makes me feel protected from the unknown, or the control somehow makes me feel protected from what might happen, or who might hurt me, or how things might unfold. And it gives me this false sense of security, right? So when we're asked to trust God, or to rely on God, or to depend on God, like, how does that feel in your own life? Because in the reality, of course, all of us, every day of our life, are asked to trust in Him, to depend on Him, to rely on Him. Now, on one hand, when we read the Acts of the Apostles, and even though for some of us it seems like a story a long time ago, but there's a reason why the church every year for Easter brings us right back there. We see miracles unfolding. And when I look at my life, every time that I have had to depend on God, rely on Him, and trust in Him, He's always come through for me, right? That's where I see the miracles of His provision. That's where I see the miracles of His leading me. That's where I see the miracles of Him loving me with mercy and compassion. So on one hand, when we trust in God and depend on God, it opens up space where God can provide and bless us. But at the same time, it also engenders lots of emotions. And it's those emotions in my life that sometimes have more of an influence over me than what I'm thinking, or what I'm wanting, or the words in the Bible. Our emotions have an enormous influence over our decision-making and our capacity to stay still in the present moment and to let God love us. So, a simple question for you today. How does it feel to trust God? How does it feel to depend on Him? And maybe it's the current circumstances of COVID-19 that shed light on that. Maybe it's just in general, but regardless of whether COVID-19 ends tomorrow or not, that's not going to change the fact that you and I are called by God to depend on Him, to trust in Him, to rely on Him. So here's just a question for you today. How does that feel when you hear that invitation? Now, let me kind of outline for you where we're going this week. As we walk this week together, we're going to talk about learning from Acts of the Apostles, not only how to depend on God, but why we might resist that. We're also going to talk about the different ways that God might speak to us, and how to depend on God when we don't hear Him. We're going to talk about how to depend on God when He's leading us, but to also how to do that when we don't see the path forward, right? So that's kind of like where we're going this week. But as we start a journey together, just sit with the question today. What's it like for you to have to depend on God, or to have to rely on Him with everything that's in your heart? I'll close with this. As I was praying this weekend, one of the things that God did is He reminded me of how many times in the past I have had to rely on Him and depend on Him, and just how many times He's come through for me. And so that's going to be our homework today. What's your history of trust in God? What's your history of depending on God? Has God come through? Or have there been moments where you haven't seen His activity? Has God answered those prayers in His own way, in His own time? Or have there been moments where you haven't been able to see that answer to that prayer? What's your history of trusting in God? Because when my emotions are raging inside of me, I have to rely on something more than emotion, like my intellect or my memory. And my memory, His history, you might say, of how many times He's come through for me, is oftentimes what anchors me when I fear all that I fear in trusting God. What's your history of having to trust in the Lord, and what are the emotions that are there? That's our homework for today. As we continue to walk together this week, I certainly encourage you also, if you need something to read, just to pick up Acts of the Apostles. If you want to just start in chapter 1 and just begin to make your way through the process, that would be an awesome way to journey. Or if you just want to go online and track down the MASH readings that are at Daily Mass, whether it be the weekdays or the weekends, that they're going to walk you through Acts of the Apostles in a systematic way. And to ask yourself, like, as you're reading, how are you seeing these people trusting God? So if you need something to pray with today, Acts of the Apostles would be an awesome place for us to pray. Looking forward to walking with you this week as we learn more about trusting in Him. And until our conversation unfolds tomorrow, God bless you.